Okay, we're going to take a look at how I use test-driven development and Glass to make a nav bar. And this is your typical Bootstrap nav bar. We have a link to the home item, and we have a link to the children of home, about us, contact us, and products. And you'll notice that the currently active item is highlighted. So let's take a look at how that's wired together. First of all, let's take a look at the markup. Going to navbar CSHTML. There we go. Okay, nothing that unusual here. We have some syntax to create the ubiquitous hamburger icon, and then here we actually have our business logic. It's not really business logic, it's a simple for each loop. And then we're toggling the active flag that's required by Bootstrap based on a value on this. The model has a items collection, and we iterate through it, and then each item that we iterate over is of type nav item, which has a active Boolean flag, has a URL, and has a name. So that's what we use to present this. And then the actual controller is fairly straightforward. We can see we create the model, we get the home item, and we're going to come back to the Sitecore context here. And then we take the home item, we get the current item URL, we iterate through the children of the home item and populate our navbar model, and we have a little bit of logic to find out which is the active link here. So let's take a look at how the tests that were involved in writing this code. So a couple things to call out here. First of all, we haven't seen this before. I have a setup method, which is used. This method will run before each test. And this is creating my controller. And just as we injected in the earlier demo an iDateTime to give us access to the system clock, here we're injecting a Sitecore context to give us access to Sitecore. And just as we could stub out iDateTime and basically have it act in the way we wanted to for our tests, we can do the same thing with Sitecore with this interface pointing to Sitecore. So first few tests were just based on getting this stubbed out, some scaffolding, confirming that I get the name of the view is navbar, confirming that it's returning a navbar model. Here we actually get to the real Sitecore functionality. We're saying, just want to point out how these test names are fairly descriptive. Navbar controller, if there are no children of the home item, it should return an empty list. So here we see that the context, home items, children returns a simple list here. And just want to point out how and substitute allows you to drill fairly deeply into specify what gets returned several objects deep. This is the fake. It will then generate a fake from this call, which will generate a list of children, which we can actually script the return. Script what's in it. So that's a pretty nice, useful syntax. So we're arranging that this returns an empty list, and we're confirming that the navbar model has no items. And that's useful because we can see that it's not throwing an exception, it's working cleanly. Here, if it has two items, then, and you can see I'm setting up child 1 and child 2, and I'm saying that the list will return those two items. I'm making sure my count has two items in it. And now I make sure that if an item is returned, it has the name field populated and it has the URL field populated. And note how there's, again, the concept of a single logical concept in each test, so that if something breaks, we should be able to tell from the name of the test exactly what went wrong. And if something goes wrong, we should see one failing test or two failing tests, not suddenly 100 failing tests, which basically is then useless because you have to go debug to figure out what's going on. So making the actual content of the test really specific is very, very helpful. And here we have our logic to set the active flag. And we can see this is pretty straightforward. We have child 1 and child 2 are the items in the nav bar. And we see that the current item is set to child 1. And that just is showing that the logic to match up the 2 is in place. But this is not really acceptable for navbar because we would probably want to have that child 1 active if a descendant of it is being shown, or we could imagine that as being a normal requirement. So let's add a test to cover that case. So again, having tests in place is very helpful when you want to extend tests. The first test is the hardest. All the tests after that are pretty easy. So let's call this one navbar controller when child is, first of all, I don't like the word child, so I think we're going to rename some of these. We're going to call this when navbar item is ancestor of context item set active. And so we have our 2 navbar items, and we could come back and change child 1 and child 2 later on. And the context item is going to be child 1 grandchild. Okay? And we're getting a failure because this is no longer showing as active. So that's good. So we have a good failing test. Let's go here. And it's pretty clear we're going to have to change this method. Well, I think the obvious thing to do is to just check that this is, that the child URL contains the current URL. Still failing. And I actually was honestly surprised by that last night. One nice feature we can do is we can go to break into first failing test at this line. And you can see that there's one failing test, so that should work. And if we look, child URL is child, and that clearly does not contain child 1 grandchild. Okay, so we can stop debugging. And let's try doing that the other way. And we're green. Boom, we've just added some functionality.